Hi everyone, welcome to Java Techie. In this tutorial, I'll walk you through the end-to-end continuous integration and continuous deployment process for deploying a Spring Boot app on AWS ECS using CodePipeline and CodeBuild. Okay, alright. So if you are new to this term, then I would strongly suggest you to check out my AWS playlist where I cover the basic to advanced concept. You can find this particular playlist. I will also share the link in video description for your reference. Cool. Before we start configuring AWS services, let's understand the challenges we faced without CI/CD. Then we'll move on to how to set it up. Fine. So let's assume you have created a Spring Boot app. Then you want to deploy this particular app to AWS Elastic Container Service. Then what all basic steps you need to follow? It's straightforward, right? So what you need to do, once you have a Spring Boot app with you, the first step, you need to create a Docker image. To create a Docker image, you need to create a Docker file. So once you have created the Docker image, then you need to push that image to AWS ECR. Now once you push the image to AWS ECR, then the next step, you need to pull that image from AWS ECS and you need to run it. This looks good, right? Now let's assume I got some update. I did some code changes. Then I want to again deploy that latest changes to AWS ECS. Then again I need to repeat this step. I need to create the Docker image again. Then I need to push that latest Docker image to ECR. Then I need to run that image again in AWS ECS. So every time I do the code change, I need to follow these steps manually, which could be overloaded for a developer, right? Which is a repeated task rather than I do it manually. Why can't I automate it? So what I want, once I commit the code to the GitHub, then I want creating the Docker image and pushing it to the ECR should be automated. Okay. So to solve our issue, AWS provided one service called AWS CodeBuild, who will help you to do your continuous integration. So as part of this particular architecture, we are expecting someone to create the Docker image and push it to ECR. That is part of our continuous integration. Okay, and AWS code build will helps to build your project or build your configuration. But how AWS code build will know what steps to follow? So for that, you need to write a file called buildspec.yml file, and in that particular YML file, you need to tell to the AWS code build, hey, I want to build a Docker image and I want to push it to the ECR. I am giving this command to you. You please execute. Okay. So this buildspec.yml will contains the instruction for AWS code build. So once your image is available in Elastic Container Registry, then next you need to deploy that to AWS ECS, which you can consider as your continuous deployment or continuous delivery flow. Now, how can I perform that? So to help you on continuous delivery or continuous deployment, AWS offered you another services that is called AWS CodePipeline. Using AWS CodePipeline, you can inform to AWS who will build your project and where you want to deploy your project. Okay, so these are the basic steps you need to follow to perform CI/CD in AWS cloud, or just run your app on AWS ECS using CodeBuild and CodePipeline. Okay, so if you look into the flow, we are using two different services to perform CI/CD in AWS, that is AWS CodeBuild and AWS CodePipeline. Fine. So the destination could be anything, whether you want to deploy your app to AWS ECS or EKS, or you want to run it in simply Elastic Beanstalk, that is up to you. But to perform CI/CD, you must need to use AWS CodePipeline and AWS CodeBuild to automate the steps. Fine. So we'll follow the same steps in action. But before that, try to picturize this particular image on your mind and we'll follow the same steps as it is. Okay. Don't worry. I will go step by step. So at very first step, we need to create a Spring Boot app. Then only we can run that app on AWS ECS, right? So if I will go to my ID, I already created a small Spring Boot app. So if you will check the controller class, I have defined a CRUD endpoint for course object, adding the course, retrieve all the course, update the course and delete the course. Okay. And if you'll check in the service class, I have used simple in-memory collection and I'm performing all the CRUD operations specific to the course object. Okay. There is no rocket science in this code. This is simple CRUD operation. And the same app I want to run on AWS ECS. Okay. So if you follow the flow, now I have the application ready with me. Now the next step, I need to create the Docker image. Okay. So who will create the Docker image for me? AWS CodeBuild. But to create the Docker image by AWS CodeBuild, the basic steps, I need to define the Docker file. So the first step, define a Docker file in your application to Dockerize your app. So let's create the Docker file. Just define the input. So I'm using the OpenJDK 17 and I want to create a working directory /app. Then I want to copy the jar file from target to the working directory, and then the expose port. On this particular port, my app will run on the container and command to execute my jar. Okay, these were the Docker file content I have added. Now if you go to the flow, you have created Docker file so that AWS CodeBuild can build a Docker image for you. Now what is the next step? Once it creates the Docker image for you, the next step, you want to push it to ECR, right? So we need to create a Elastic Container Registry in AWS console. So just go to the browser, then just go to the Elastic Container Registry, just open this, then just create a new repo, click on create, define any name. I'll give Java Techie registry, then nothing to do, just click on create repo. Now you can see here, right? Your repository is also created. Fine. So if you'll go to the flow, we are done with the step 1 and step 2. Now we have defined the Docker file so that AWS CodeBuild can create a Docker image for me. I have created a ECR Elastic Container Registry so that AWS CodeBuild can push that image to ECR. But how AWS CodeBuild will understand what I want to do? I need to define a buildspec.yml file. Okay, in the buildspec.yml file, I will provide instruction to AWS CodeBuild to perform the step 1 and 2. So for that, go to your code and define a file. You can name it, you must need to name it buildspec.yml. Okay. Now in this buildspec.yml file, you need to define the command to create the Docker image and push the image to hub. Fine. So let me add the commands. Anyway, you will find the source code on video description. So you can also use the same steps. No need to remember the entire command, but you need to understand what we are doing in each phase. Okay. So there are 3 phases: pre-build, build phase and post-build phase. In the build phase, we are generating the jar file because to create a Docker image, Docker file need a jar, right? So first step, we are just generating a jar file. Then we are trying to log into Elastic Container Registry which we created. Just paste that particular URL. Just copy this URI and just paste it. So once you have the repository URI with you, you want to log into AWS ECR using this particular command. Now if you see here, the repository ECR I created on the region AP South 1. So I also need to specify that login to the ECR which is running on AP South 1 and this is the repository URI. Once that is done, I am asking here to generate a commit hash. I am just defining here cut-c1-7. It means I am just telling that extract the first 7 character of the commit hash. Okay. Then I am also generating a image tag for what I can say. It will generate a unique tag. Okay, based on the build ID. Fine. This is the simple step we are doing in the pre-phase or pre-build. We are just log into AWS ECR and we are generating the commit hash and image tag. Now the next phase is build phase. So if you observe in this particular build phase, what we are doing? Nothing. We are just building the Docker image and we are just tagging that particular image. Okay. Now the important step, that is the post build step, where exactly we are pushing the image to ECR. Can you see here? So Docker push repository URI with the latest tag with the unique image tag. Okay. So if you observe here, we are pushing the image to ECR twice. The reason, the first command, which is with the latest, this command push the Docker image tagged as a latest to the Amazon ECR. So the latest tag is commonly used to signify the most recent version of image. Okay. And the second one, Docker push repository URI image tag. This command push the Docker image tagged with a unique identifier, that is nothing your image tag, to the Amazon ECR repo. So basically the image tag what we are generating based on the build ID or commit hash, that is what we are doing on the phase 1, right? Then once that is done, once the push is successful, I am also defining what is the container name. What is the container name we have created? Just copy the name, Java Techie registry, just paste it. That's it. So it's just a simple 3 steps we are following. Pre-phase, we are just log into ECR and adding the commit as image tag. In the build phase, we are building the image and tagging the image. In the post phase, we are just pushing the image to ECR. Okay. This is what our goal and we are doing in the buildspec.yml file. Now just go back to the flow. We are done with the step 3. So we have defined the buildspec.yml file. Now let's give that buildspec.yml file to AWS CodeBuild to perform a continuous integration for me. Okay. So again, the fourth step is create the AWS CodeBuild. Just go to the AWS console, then just search your CodeBuild. Before that, what I want to do, I want to push these changes to my branch. Okay. So I will add a valid message Docker file. So I have pushed the changes. So if you will go to the repo, I already created a repository. In that repo, I have just added the Docker file and buildspec.yml file. Okay. So this is the same repo. If you check here, if you go to the terminal, you can see here, right? This is the same repo. Fine. Now let's open the build AWS CodeBuild and start creating a project. Because if you observe what AWS CodeBuild needs, he need a buildspec.yml file, and wherever buildspec.yml file is there, it is in the GitHub. Okay. So I need to give the complete info about where exactly my buildspec.yml located to AWS CodeBuild. So just go here, give the project name. I will give something like course service or course project. Then who is the source? Is my GitHub. What is the GitHub repo? Is the AWS CI-CD, this one. Okay. Then nothing to do here. Now you need to create a role. So I'll just follow some pattern to create a role name, append with service hyphen role. Okay, now here either you add the buildspec.yml manually by switching to editor, or just use the buildspec.yml file which is there in this particular repo. Okay, fine. Now nothing to do, just scroll down and create build project. Okay, so this role is already there, course app, something like that I can give. So you can see here project created. Now just close it. Now I can start the build. Okay, but this role need few more policy to attach in this particular role. Okay, so for that either go to IAM and search for this particular role, or just directly navigate from here. Now here click on add permission, attach policy, search here container, then just choose Amazon EC2 container registry full access and Amazon EC2 container registry power user. These two policy we need to attach to our role. Just add the permission, all set. Okay, now if you will go to your code build project, now if you go to the course project, now you can start the build. So once you will start the build, what will happen? AWS CodeBuild will read your buildspec.yml from the GitHub and it will execute the steps you have defined. Okay, what steps we have defined? Create the Docker image and push it to ECR. So let's run the build and we'll validate whether our CI steps is working correctly or not. Continuous integration specific steps is working correctly or not. Okay, just go here, start a fresh build, just click on tail logs to check the last logs. You can visualize the phase. Currently it is on pre-build phase. It will download all the dependency because it will execute mbn clean install. So it will just download all the dependency. Then if you observe, running command echo logging into Amazon ECR. Okay, that is what we have trying to log into ECR in the pre-build. Now it changed to build phase. Can you see here? And in build phase, whatever the steps we have defined, it is doing that. It is building the Docker image, and now it is in the post build. It is trying to push the image to ECR. So you can see here the status is succeeded. Now let's go to our ECR and validate whether the image is pushed or not. Okay, just open the registry. Yeah, can you see here? We can see the image with the two different tags. One is the latest tag and another one is the with the image tag. Okay, that is what we have pushed the two command of docker push. Okay, we can see the image. That's great. So if you check the flow, we are done with AWS code build. It means our continuous integration part is working as expected. We are successfully able to dockerize the image and push it to Elastic Container Registry using AWS code build. Now the next step, we need to focus on continuous delivery and continuous deployment. So for this flow, I want to deploy my application to AWS ECS. So I need to create this Elastic Container Service infrastructure in my AWS first. Okay, that is what my fifth step. Once the environment will be ready, then only I can perform the CD step. I can deploy the changes. Fine. Now we need to create the AWS ECS. Just go to the browser, go to the AWS console, open this Elastic Container Service. Now here you need to follow some steps. You need to create the task definition, then you need to create the cluster, then in the cluster you need to add a service, and from the service you need to run the task definition. Again, if this is confusing you, stop the video and check out my AWS playlist. I have clearly explained about ECR, ECS, all the services. Just have a look and come back to the video again. Okay. So first let me create a task definition. Create new task definition. You can give any name. Let me give like course task, and launch type I am using AWS Fargate because that is serverless. I can use that, and I want to reduce the task size memory allocation. Then I need to give the container details. Okay, where exactly my image are present. So my image are present in this particular registry. What is the name of that registry? Java Techie -registry. Just give that name. And what is the image URI? I'll directly give the path of my registry. Okay, so that when the build will be initiated, it will automatically pick the latest image from the repo. I could have n number of images here, right? Always it should take the latest image. So rather than hardcode the image URI, I am giving the repository URI. So this is what the URI. Just give it in a task definition. Fine. Then just add the port 8080 to access by the host. Then nothing to do. Just click on create. Now the next step, create a cluster. Click on create cluster. Then give the cluster name. I'll give Java Techie cluster. You can give any name. Okay, there is no restriction. Now choose the infrastructure as AWS Fargate. Then nothing to do, I believe. All good. Click on create. It will take few seconds. If you want, you can check the status of your cluster creation. Just go to this cloud formation and you can visualize the status. Now can you see here the create state is completed. Now if you'll go and check here, you can see the cluster here. Now from this cluster we don't have any task. No task is running, right? Either you map task directly to this particular cluster, or just create a service and map the task to that particular service. Both the way you can do that. Okay, so just go to the cluster. Now here you have option to map the task and you have option to create the service. Okay, so just click on this create service. The cluster name is this. Launch type I want to change it to AWS Fargate. Then application type is service. To this particular service I want to assign the task which I created. That is what I mentioned, right? You can do it on two different way. Directly play with the task, or create a service, map your task. Okay, then what is the service name you want to give? I'll give something like course-service v2, something like that. Okay, then anything else? Let's see. Expand the networking. You need to create a new security group, and here you need to allow all the traffic coming from outside to access your resource. Okay, that bypass you need to add here. All TCP from anywhere. That's it. Just click on create. Again it will take few minutes to create a service for you. So you can see here, right, the service has been deployed successfully. Now go to the cluster and just click on this link. Then if you will come to the service, inside service you will find a task. Okay, can you see here? Now just open that. You will find a public IP. Just open that address. So this particular project which I am trying to run in AWS ECS, I have added a OpenAI dependency so that it will give me the Swagger. That will be easy for me to testing rather than hit the endpoint from the postman. Okay, so let's try to access the Swagger endpoint 8080 slash swagger hyphen ui.html. So if you observe here, it is loading my endpoints. Let's try accessing the post. Since this is in-memory collection, we don't have any record pre-populated. So let's add few record. Let's say course ID 1, name is equal to spring. Okay, price 500. Let me add another 2. So we have added 2 records. The status is 201 created. Now let's get the endpoint. Get all the cores. We got the result. Okay, so endpoint is working. My application is successfully able to run in AWS ECS. But the deployment step currently we have did it manually. Okay, for example, let me show you one thing. Now, if let's assume I want to do some code change that I don't want to enable the health check. Just comment it for now. Now, if I'll commit these changes, disable. I'll just commit and push these changes. Now, as per the flow, once you push the changes, immediately your AWS code build will trigger. The pipeline will be initiated here. Okay, and then we'll observe whether the new image what is pushed to ECR is being deployed to AWS ECS or not. Okay, because we created AWS ECS instance. Let's see whether the new changes is being reflected the image which is there in AWS ECS or not. Okay, so if you'll observe here, it will immediately start a build. Let me show you. Just go to the course project, build project. So if you observe here, let me refresh this. The build is not getting started. So if we'll let's check the configuration. Project, GitHub. Okay, so we just need to add the webhook revealed every time a code changes is pushed to the repo. That is what we need to inform to CodeBuild, saying that any push you found or any new commit you found to the repo, just start a single build. Okay, remove the filter group, we don't need it. Let's not touch anything, just update the project. Just go to the build project. Now let's add some fake commit and we'll see. See here, it immediately started the build. The build number is 2. Now if we'll open this, download source page, then it is pre-build. Once pre-build is done, it will again execute build and post build. So you can visualize the logs here. So if you observe here, build is succeeded. So the phase is completed. Now to validate that, go to your registry and just refresh it. You will find the different image. Okay, the recent image, not this one, the latest one. Okay, now as for the flow, this particular latest image which is there in ECR needs to deploy to ECS. Then only whatever the changes I have just added, disable the health check, should display in the response, right? So let's validate it. Just go to your Swagger, just refresh it. The changes are not there. Still my elastic container service pointing to the old image which is there in ECR. It means we have done the build process automated, but we have not automated the deployment steps yet. Whatever the image is the latest one, I want that to auto deploy to AWS ECS. So creating a AWS code pipeline and configuring the deployment step is the last step. Okay, in the AWS code pipeline, you need to inform who is the source from where you are getting the code, that is GitHub. Now who is your build tool? For me, build tool is the AWS CodeBuild. Now where you want to deploy your changes, that is AWS ECS. All these three information you need to provide to AWS code pipeline. Okay, so what we'll do, go to the console and I will just open code pipeline. Next, just create a new pipeline, give some valid name. I will give course pipeline v2, something like that. Then service role, let it create a new role for you. Then anything else to add? No. So if you observe here, we need to follow 5 steps. Step 1, create the pipeline definition. 2, just define, see here, add source stage. Just tell to the code pipeline who is your source, from where you will get the updated code. That is nothing your GitHub, right? Similarly, you have a third step, that is build stage. Who will build code for you or the task for you? AWS code build, right? You need to define that. Now add a deploy stage, where you want to deploy your changes. That is what you need to define in the 4th step. Once you have defined all, then just review and complete it. Okay, so let's see. Now click on next. Now source provider is GitHub for me. Connect to the GitHub. You need to authorize your AWS account from the GitHub. Then what is the repo? My repo is AWS-CICD. The branch is main. I'm going to use the GitHub webhook. Let it be. Click on next. Then who is your build provider? For me, if you understand it correctly, who is our build provider here? AWS CodeBuild. Who is doing our continuous integration step? CI, right? So that is my code provider or build provider. If you have Jenkins, you can also do that. Now we have created a build code build project, right? If you remember, we have created this project, this one, right? So just you don't need to copy, it will be auto appear to you. Just go here, choose the project name, then anything else? No. Click on next. Now what is your destination, where you want to deploy your changes? I want to deploy in the Amazon ECS Elastic Container Service. Now what is the cluster name you have created? JavaDigi cluster. What is the service name we have created here? If you will go here, what is the service name? Course-service-v2, right? It should auto suggest here. Yeah, can you see here? Then nothing to do, just click on next, submit, and just create the pipeline. So you can see here, right? This is the pipeline. First step was source. So you can see here, source is GitHub. Now you can see this buffering, right? It is on the phase 2. That is what the build phase. Who is doing the build for us? AWS CodeBuild. If you want to see the details, you can just click on this view details. You can just find the logs here. Okay, that's fine. Just close it. Once the build will be done, the mark will move to the next one, that is deploy stage. Yeah, can you see here? It came to the deploy stage, and where it is deploying? The Amazon ECS. Let it deploy, then we'll validate whether the changes are there or not. As part of the changes, we have just disabled this, right? Let's validate that. Then we'll do some code change and we'll see whether that is really automatically getting deployed to AWS ECS or not. Let's see. This deployment might take 1 or 2 minutes, so we need to wait. See the last commit we can see here, right? If you see here, click on view details, view in ECS to watch the complete log. Just wait it to complete. So it looks it's taking more time. So if you want, just check the logs. So it's loading the project. Let's see. So it could be because of the network glitch, but let's wait it to complete to validate. Yeah. So I believe it's done. Let's see. Yeah, it's done, right? You can see here all the three status is green mark. I mean the build is succeeded. So let's our goal is to validate the changes is getting reflected or deployed in AWS ECS or not. So just go to the ECS, close the other one which we open. Now in the ECS, go to the task, go to the service, or just open this. You can find the IP, just open the address. I'll copy the URL. Okay, can you see here? We disabled the health endpoint which is not appearing in the latest version which was deployed to AWS ECS, right? It was auto deployed. Now to cross validate again, let's do some more changes and we'll validate in a one go that how CI is working and CD is working, whether really the things what I just commit the changes to the GitHub is getting auto trigger the build and deploying it to ECS or not. Okay, so what I'll do, I'll just enable it again. Along with that, I will also add some test endpoint. Okay, test or welcome, something like that. Fine. Now let me commit these changes. So let's give the valid message, commit message, new endpoint added, something like that. Okay. Tick mark what you want to push, commit and push, commit anyway and push the changes. Okay. So once the push is done, if you will go here, first go to your code build. Okay. See here the, let me refresh this. Yeah. Can you see here why there are two different build is going on? Let's see the commit message for this. Okay, let it be. Anyway, the latest one is also going on. So you can see here the status is success. Now all good. Close it and it should trigger the pipeline automatically. See here. The build is done, right? Let me refresh it. So automatically it is started. The first one is done. Second one is nothing, your build AWS code build, which is going on actually. If you see here, build project, it's done here. So it should be reflected here within a second. Yeah, it is done. The build is done. Now it is in the deploy phase. So let it complete. It will take again 3 to 4 minutes. You can see here new endpoint added. That is what the latest push we have added to our Git. So now if you let it be, let's go to the flow. Now if you understand here, as part of this particular CICD, being a developer, I focus on writing the code and pushing my changes to my repo. Okay. Next to that, do the build, generate the image, push it to ECR, then get the latest image from AWS ECR, then deploy it to AWS ECS, the entire process is automated. I did the infra setup once. Going forward, I just need to commit the changes or push the changes to my repo. Everything will be automated by this CICD tool, AWS CodeBuild and AWS CodePipeline. So let's validate that once the deployment is done. So we need to wait. So if you observe, the deployment is successful. It almost took 3.5 minutes for me to complete. That's fine. Let's wait. Let's check the result. Okay, let's open this. Then just go to the task, open it, get the IP. Just type 8080/swagger. So here is the result. The health we enabled again, and we have added this new endpoint, right? So try it out. Just execute. Just a string message. Fine. It means CI and CD both are automated using AWS CodePipeline and CodeBuild. So this is how we can perform CI/CD in AWS Cloud Infrastructure using AWS CodePipeline and AWS CodeBuild. Whatever the source and destination you are using, that doesn't matter. You must need to use this CodeBuild and CodePipeline services from AWS to do a continuous integration and continuous deployment. So this is really dead easy. If you will understand this particular flow, you can connect the dot correctly and you can configure the service correctly. Okay, so you need to understand only the flow, what sequence you need to follow. Okay, so that's it. Do let me know in a comment section if you guys have any doubts. That's all about this particular video, guys. Thanks for watching this video. Meet you soon with a new concept.